Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Western Transboundary Watersheds and the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909. My name is Jill Weitz. I work for Salmon State and serve as the director of the Salmon Beyond Borders campaign based in Juneau, Alaska, which is the traditional lands of the Taku and Akwon people. I will be moderating today's webinar as well as participating as a panelist, so thank you for bearing with me. We are thankful for your attendance today, and I am truly honored to be here with such a distinguished panel and the gift of everyone's time and knowledge. With that being said, we have an incredible lineup and limited time. My colleague Bree will be monitoring Q&As, which will be followed up with after the webinar. You will also receive a brief survey following the webinar, and we encourage you to record your questions there as well. And keep an eye out in the Zoom chat box below, as Bree may insert helpful links along the way. We are here today to begin a dialogue, and in many ways continue a dialogue, as we explore the institutional governing mechanisms of shared watersheds. We will also hear from leadership the various tools and methods Indigenous communities have adopted and are adopting to address water issues of shared concern. We will move through each of these panelists, recognizing that we will only really be able to scratch the surface of this very complex international issue. And in doing so, we create ample opportunity for follow-up with each other and with you. A very quick background for those of you who are newer to this issue. The term transboundary implies the colonial establishment of political borders. Today, we will focus on transboundary rivers that originate in British Columbia and flow downstream into and across the international border into Alaska, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. Like the Indigenous people of these regions, water does not recognize political borders, and there is much work to be done to improve the existing and non-binding governance framework. As you can see in this slide, the Memorandum of Understanding that British Columbia has with Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Alaska, and work to be done to ensure that federal and Indigenous governments are leading the way to protect human health and to preserve and restore water quality and ecological integrity in these shared US-BC rivers and landscapes. Again, this is just the beginning. So let's get going. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Tis Peterman, who is the Executive Director of the Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Tis Peterman. I'm of Tahltan and Tlingit descent. I was born and raised at the mouth of the Stickeen River in Wrangell, Alaska. I'm now the Executive Director of SEITC, which represents 15 federally recognized tribes in Southeast Alaska. And we've been working on unifying the voices of First Nations and tribes on the threat of transboundary mining to our downstream communities. In order to do that, we've had 2 summits so far. The first one is in 2018. And we came out with a common statement of standing. And then in 2019, we had our second summit and came out with a statement on the salmon crisis. And during that time, we now have a standing alliance committee of 3 persons from the First Nations and 3 members of the tribes on the US side. So we're in the process of planning our 3rd summit, which will be held in the fall of 2020. I'm very honored to be on this panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion that we've been waiting to hear for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tis. I am now delighted to introduce you to 2 commissioners of the 6-person US-Canada International Joint Commission who have joined us today to provide us with background information on the Boundary Waters Treaty, as well as the mandate of the International Joint Commission. Please welcome Meryl Ann Fair of the Canada section and Rob Sisson of the US section.
Thank you, Jill. I think I will go first, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, is my screen up? Can you see it?
It's there, yep.
Okay, so my part of the presentation will be to just explain a little bit of the background of the Boundary Waters Treaty and the IJC, and I think either dispel some misperceptions about what the IJC is, and give you a better idea of what our role is in transboundary water issues. Oops. In 1909, our two governments signed the Boundary Waters Treaty. There were a number of issues along the boundary, including things like irrigation, battles going on in the St. Mary's and Milk River area just to the east of Glacier National Park and Waterton Park, and concerns in upstate New York and Ontario about the impact of hydroelectric development on the beauty and attractiveness to tourism of Niagara Falls. And these and other issues kind of rolled into a long, multiple year discussion between our two countries, and the Boundary Waters Treaty was signed in 1909. The IJC is referenced in the treaty as a specific tool available to the two governments to help them administer the treaty. And we have two primary responsibilities. I hate to read things verbatim, but this is very critical to some of the points, or the point I want to get across today. We review and approve projects that would be dams, control structures, diversions that affect the freshwater levels and flows across the boundary. And we investigate transboundary water issues and recommend solutions at the request of the two governments. Again, we are not a regulatory agency. We are not an enforcement agency. We only can do what the two governments ask us to do. And when they make those asks, it's called a reference. And the reference will give us the terms of what we are to accomplish or try to accomplish. And that could be research, reviewing, and making recommendations back to the governments on a specific issue along the boundary. And the IJC, the way we report is on the US side up through the State Department, and in Canada through Global Affairs of Canada. This is a map that shows the transboundary basins, the major ones. We are not active or have references in all of these. We do have references in some of them. You'll see the biggest, the lion's share of the boundary waters is in the Great Lakes, and we are coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which I think has been a resounding success for both countries and for the health and welfare of the Great Lakes. Today, the commissioners, there are 3 Canadian commissioners, 3 US commissioners. The US commissioners were confirmed by the US Senate 362 days ago, and the Canadian commissioners were appointed, I think, the day before that by their government. And I believe that, my understanding is that Commissioner Lickers and Commissioner Yohe were going to dial in. I'm not sure about our 2 chairs. They have untold responsibilities administrating the organization, and may or may not be on the call today. Just a note, Henry Lickers is the first Indigenous person ever appointed to the IJC. He was appointed by the Canadian government. And Jane Corwin, the US chair, is a native of Buffalo, New York, a former New York State Assemblywoman. Pierre Ballon is from Montreal and served previously on the IJC as a commissioner, so he brings a great deal of experience. He's also one of the world's most renowned experts on beluga whales. Lance Yohe is from North Dakota and spent decades working on the Red River and Red River issues on a binational basis. So he brings a wealth of binational water management experience to the table. And then you'll hear from my colleague, Marilyn Fair, who is an attorney in Winnipeg and has more experience in Indigenous, First Nation issues, water issues, and in collaborative efforts on managing water than probably most people on the North American continent. We have 3 offices, one in Washington, one in Ottawa, and then we have a joint office in Windsor, which is our Great Lakes office that is to support our efforts on the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. We have more than 200 people working for us on boards, committees, and advisory groups across the Transboundary. Obviously, with 6 commissioners cannot bring the depth of knowledge and experience, nor do we have the capacity to really dig into all the issues along the boundary. So when the governments do give us a reference, they do afford us the opportunity to create a board or working group to, with the expertise and the ability to advise us on issues. Quickly, we have 18 boards. Some control some administer orders on dams across the boundary. Some are watershed boards. We have advisory boards in the Great Lakes, et cetera. This is a quick map of the control boards. I won't go into detail, but you can see it ranges from the east end of Lake Ontario all the way west. And then this is our watershed boards that get about to the Montana border. Oops, I guess I'm in play. I'll skip this to save time. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. When the commissioners came on board in last May, we sat down and we spent a lot of time talking about what our priorities should be. Climate change is one of those priorities. One is increasing awareness and education of what the IJC is and the Boundary Waters Treaty across the entire Transboundary. And I thank Jill and her organization today for giving us that opportunity to help expand knowledge and awareness of the IJC. With that, I'll turn it over to Meryl Ann because she will be talking about one of our other priorities that's very important to the commissioners.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting both of us, and me in particular, to the webinar today. And I'm coming to you from my home in Winnipeg. The Red River's about, 50 feet that way, really high this time of year. I'm in Treaty 1 territory, and this is the homeland of the Métis Nation, the Red River settlement. So I'm really happy to be here. I wanted to build on where Rob just left off and explain that, of course, the IJC has its mandate under the Boundary Waters Treaty, but every number of years, you get a new suite of commissioners who also bring things that they want to do and priorities that they have. And so we enter into the organization, there's existing work plans, existing references and studies that are ongoing, and then we have the things we want to try to do. And so I want to talk to you about those things that the 6 commissioners are trying to do. It's a new suite of commissioners, as Rob mentioned. First time in IJC history since the very first suite of commissioners when the treaty was created. It was all 6, all new at the same time. And so it's been a learning process for us to get to know each other and to figure out what our responsibilities are and aren't. And then to try to figure out how to do the things we care about, because we all come with really deep experience and a passion for water. I, in particular, have worked with Indigenous organizations in an Indigenous organization my entire professional life, called the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources, and also worked on Indigenous water law my whole career also. It's my deep passion. And so the things that we, as 6 commissioners, agreed by consensus that we wanted to work on, as Rob mentioned, were IJC leadership. And this is really to increase our presence all along the border. And in particular, the treaty gives a right for citizens to be heard by the IJC. And that's usually interpreted as meaning in the middle of a reference or a hearing or something like that. But we believe that it also means outreach and to engage with all citizens. And in particular, we have a really strong focus on wanting to work in a deeper way with Indigenous nations. Climate change is changing everything about what we do. It's impacting all the work our boards do. Almost all of our studies are focused on, have an overlay of climate change. The forecasting and what Mother Nature is doing is making it very difficult for us to predict trends. And so we have so much work that we're doing and are trying to do more of to figure out how to adapt to this world. And so adaptive management is a really key priority for us. In particular, I'm only the third woman, I think, that's ever been on as an IJC commissioner. I'm the first Western commissioner in 50 years on the Canadian side. So I came to this definitely with a view to trying to build a much deeper awareness of the IJC in the West and to bring Western issues to the IJC. The Great Lakes has hugely often dominates the discussion. And so that's a key goal that we all agreed was important. I would be remiss in mentioning one of the priorities we have, which is common health safety criteria. Commissioner Lickers, who isn't, I don't think, on the call, is absolutely passionate about the synergistic effects of contaminants, particularly in fish, and how it relates to human health by consumption when consuming fish, and in particular Indigenous communities who consume more fish than others. And so I think that particular priority is probably of huge importance to you. And then the final one I'll end on, and I'm going to break down, we have plans that we're working on regarding each of these priorities, but I want to spend a tiny bit more time, just a minute or two, on the last one, which is about Indigenous governments, organizations, and citizens. We have, the treaty was signed between governments, two governments, Canada and the US. Indigenous nations were not involved in that signing, obviously. And the IJC was created, we're not a government body. We are an organization created by governments, created through a treaty, but we are not a government. And we know that Indigenous governments prefer nation to nation and government to government relationships, but we hope and are interested in a relationship with Indigenous nations and governments. And so that's our big driving, our big goal on the Indigenous side, is really to see who are our potential partners all along the border. What are the possibilities of working together? What are you interested in? What about what you're interested in can we do? Do we have a mandate to do? How can we enhance participation in each other's work through sitting on boards, being part of studies, potentially creating new work? And then the last one is just how can we maybe potentially collaborate and engage together on gatherings, maybe collaboration agreements between our various organizations. So that's a big part of our work, and we're trying right now. We've only been at it for a year, so we've got 3 years to go, at least the Canadian commissioners do. 1,095 days left for the Canadian commissioners. I'll leave it there and hope that gives you a general sense, an overview of what we're trying to accomplish. And we're very happy to be here and really interested to listen to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We're now going to zoom in, if you will, I have to have some fun, to Southeast British Columbia and the Montana-Idaho Transboundary region. With that said, I'm excited to introduce Aaron Sexton, who is a senior research scientist at the University of Montana, Flathead Lake Biological Station.
Just sharing my screen here, make sure this works. Is that the right view, Jill?
You got it, Erin. You're ready to rock.
Yay. Okay, so thank you very much, Jill, and thank you to everyone for joining us. It's really an honor to be amongst this incredible leadership on this panel today. I'm joining you from Northwest Montana in the Flathead Basin and the traditional lands of the Salish and Kootenai people. I'm going to give a brief introduction of two of the transboundary rivers that are central to our discussion today. You can see them here, the Flathead Basin in lighter orange and the Kootenai in darker. Both of these rivers have their headwaters in the southern Rockies of British Columbia. They're both underlain by vast high-quality coal deposits. They both flow south across the international boundary into Montana and Idaho in the case of the Kootenai, and are important catchments of the Columbia River Basin. And it's fair to say that these rivers shape the land and the way of life of the people in this region. I first set foot in the Flathead in the early 2000s to collect water quality data in the headwaters where an open pit coal mine was proposed. We were seeking to understand the risks and impacts that a mine in the headwaters of the Flathead might have for all life downstream, including aquatic life, fish, and people. You can see the coal underground in orange at the top of this map. This is where the mine was proposed. And this is what the Flathead looked like 20 years ago, and largely what it looks like today. It is relevant to today's discussion because it is the only transboundary river shared with British Columbia that has received a referral to the International Joint Commission over proposed mining in the 1970s. You can see here the border swath cleared at the Canada-US boundary, a perfect visual of how we unnaturally divide these connected rivers. The IJC spent 3 years jointly studying the impacts of the proposed mines with Canada and US scientists. They concluded that the mine would violate Article 4 of the Boundary Waters Treaty, which says that waters flowing across the boundary shall not be polluted on either side to the injury of health or property of another. They also concluded that the mine could result in unacceptable consequences for the transboundary bull trout populations that could not be effectively mitigated. The proposed mine was never built, but it took another 3 decades before oil and gas and mining were permanently banned in the Transboundary Flathead with a joint withdrawal of mineral rights on both sides of the boundary. Which brings us to the Kootenai River. So you can see in the map on the left how the Kootenai literally stitches the international boundary together, running from British Columbia down into Montana, into Idaho, back into BC, before flowing south to join the Columbia River Basin in Washington. Zooming into the Elk River, so up here you can see, where's my mouse, the Elk River over here on the right-hand map. You can see that there are 5 large-scale open pit coal mines operating in the Elk Valley. They're colored orange, and you can see the coal basins underneath in yellow. These mines have been operating for over 100 years, and this is what the Elk looks like today. The mines are owned by Teck Coal, and they have been operating since the beginning of the century, the late 1800s actually, and they collectively make up one of the biggest coal producing regions in the world. And so, in order to summarize nearly a century of legacy mining contamination in about 60 seconds, I have chosen this graph. So you can see here, these are the selenium trends in the Elk River. And this water quality data is collected downstream of all 5 mines. And you can see here, this is the provincial guideline going horizontally 2 micrograms per liter, and the US EPA guideline. These are what the governments consider to be the threshold for toxicity for selenium. And you can see in the early 1990s, the selenium contaminant trends in the river began to cross what is considered protective of aquatic life. And then roughly from the early 80s to around 2014, these trends continued to increase in the watershed as the existing mines expanded. And then in 2014, the province of British Columbia rewrote their management plan, created a valley-wide plan, and rewrote the water quality guidelines for selenium across the Elk Valley to accommodate the increasing levels that were occurring in the watershed and expected to occur over the long time. And currently, the mines are permitted to leach selenium into the watershed at levels of 2 micrograms per liter down at the international boundary, all the way up to 130 micrograms per liter of selenium up at in the Fording River. And so today, despite millions of dollars of investment, contamination is increasing in the watershed. Mitigations have not proven to be effective, and there are new mines and mine expansions proposed. Today's dialogue is important to the future of the Transboundary Kootenai watershed and the unabated contamination to the Kootenai is a warning to our other shared watersheds. And to wrap up, I will briefly summarize where I think we need to do better for the water quality, fish, and communities for the future of the Kootenai. We need a watershed scale approach. We currently have piecemeal assessment of mines and impacts. We have fragmented processes in decision making. And we have a lack of access to data and transparency for data with respect to decision making. And in full, this piecemeal assessment is inherently opposed to everything that we know about river ecology and how watersheds work. We also need inclusive government and governance and decision making. There are 8 governments that are impacted by the mining in the Elk Valley: 2 federal, 1 provincial, 3 Indigenous, and 2 state. To date, the province of BC and the state of Montana have made most of the decisions. The selenium from the Elk Valley mines is reaching all the way down the Kootenai River to where the Kootenai River crosses from British Columbia, from Idaho back into British Columbia. Even despite this, the state of Idaho and the Kootenai tribe are not decision makers at the table. And just to put a finer point on that, Tech's northernmost mine at the Fording River has just initiated the environmental assessment process to expand their mine by nearly half the existing size. And it remains to be seen whether this decision will take under consideration the past, present, and future of fish like the Kootenai River white sturgeon, over 300 kilometers down river from the northernmost mine as they consider this expansion. That's all I have. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for that overview, Erin. Remember to everyone, we're just scratching the surface, and we'll be sure to answer any questions attendees might have following the webinar. I'm now honored to introduce Chairwoman Shelley Fyant of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribe of Montana.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelley Fyant, and I currently serve as the chairwoman of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes of the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana. I am Bitterroot Salish and Métis from the Red River settlement area on my dad's side. I'm a mother to 4 adult sons, a grandmother to 6 girls and 1 boy, and a great-grandmother to a feisty 2-year-old who was born 8 weeks early. Regarding the transboundary mining issues, my concerns are sustaining clean water for future generations. Remember the saying, everyone lives downstream. In a watershed, we all live downstream. This means that the quality of water available to us is determined by our upstream neighbors. And in this case, that's Canada. It is absolutely vital that we take on the responsibility of protecting the quality of water for those who live downstream. And as Indigenous people, our original instructions were to live in harmony with nature and to have a reciprocal relationship with all living things. Water is the lifeblood of Mother Earth. From before our very birth, we were carried in water by our mothers. And after we enter this life, our bodies are made up of 75% water. We depend on water for all living things, for our very sustenance. And we as humans are an integral part of the watersheds we rely on for our very existence. We carry that responsibility to speak for those who can't. Animals, the birds, the water creatures, the plants, foods, and medicine that we rely on. And we feel a strong responsibility for the health of all of the rivers, streams, oceans, creeks, and ancestral springs. So my government's vision for the future, as the Salish and Kootenai people, we consider ourselves people of vision. Try to share my screen here. Can y'all see that? Okay. So as a people of vision, we realize that we are the answers to our ancestors' prayers and their vision for the future. Again, we carry the responsibility to leave this earth better, or at least as good as we inherited it. And we've done a pretty poor job of that 50 years later. We just commemorated the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And if we consider where we are with climate change overall, we've done a very poor job as humans upholding that responsibility. And one of the basic things that we envision for the future is clean water for our children, our grandchildren, and many more generations to come. Protecting that water cuts to the very core of who I am as a Salish woman. As a Native woman, in our worldview, men are the keepers of the fire and women protect the water, as we are both life givers. From our very conception, we're carried in by our mothers in sacred water. And as women, we carry that responsibility throughout life. As a tribal council woman, as a mother and a grandmother, I take that very seriously. I was compelled to go to Standing Rock in 2016. The following year, Montana discovered quagga and zebra mussels across on the other side of the Continental Divide. And our tribe was very instrumental in getting legislation passed in Montana to provide funding and the mandatory check stations across the state of Montana to prevent their spread, which would destroy our clean waters, including the entire Columbia River Basin and our way of life as we know it. Now selenium is poisoning our fish from these mines upstream, and this is not acceptable. As a leader, I always try to look for upstream solutions, not band-aiding problems, but looking to the core issues. So our government's perspective on the Boundary Waters Treaty and the International Joint Commission. We think that the IJC's participation in transboundary waters is essential, and we have sought IJC participation since at least 2012. Engagement with the IJC is a key element of supporting tribal authority in the territory, addressing long-term impacts and ensuring effective enforcement to protect traditional cultural uses by our nations. Regardless of the regulatory standards that are developed, BC will be in violation of the Boundary Waters Treaty upon adoption of the selenium criteria and will require federal engagement. Current construct of the BC Montana MOUs is both a significant cause and effect of these failures. The 2010 MOU included tribes as witnesses, but excluded them as signatories, excluding them from the decision making. Currently, there is no legal binding agreement between Montana and BC to jointly adopt and enforce water quality standards at the border. Any approved standard, at least in Montana, US, is lower than current discharge contaminant levels, and upon adoption and approval, the mines will immediately be in violation. The current rubric is not protective and will not protect water quality, fish, animals, plants, and all those cultural resources in the foreseeable future. River contaminants run above any threshold considered protective of aquatic life and underscores something needs to happen to protect these species, and that is not happening now. As I said, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes have sought IJC participation since at least 2012, and we've engaged or sought to engage with the Department of State during that period, and have copied many of our concerns to Global Affairs Canada. CSKT would gladly work with any entity that would also work to protect water quality and the resources that depend on that water. We recognize that any solution to a transboundary problem requires both international and federal agency participation to any resolution, because those transboundary issues require multiple federal, state, and tribal jurisdictions, as was mentioned before. We need a long-term framework and funding for monitoring in the watershed south of the border. The monitoring informs the enforcement to ensure standards are adhered to, and for natural resource damages assessment. Long-term monitoring is a federal purview. EPA on the US side is doing this, which is good. And I understand the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho is collaboratively monitoring with U.S. Geological Service and the feds, but the states can't enforce international treaties. This must be IJC and federal. Transboundary territories require special oversight and enforcement, but when that oversight fails, such as it is now failing with the Elk watershed and elsewhere along the Canadian-US boundary, then international participation is necessary. The tribes are very concerned that those regulatory entities are clearly failing, specifically water and the fish and wildlife that depend on it, and cultural practices that depend on those. Only federal and international engagement will ensure that BC and Tech will actually implement a plan instead of spending a lot of time on one and then changing the plan, ensuring that there's always something better to come, but no end point and continuing degradation. The provincial state process neglects cultural resources and tribal treaties. This requires IJC participation to protect them. Impacts to cultural resources are a critical human element. Long-term cumulative impacts to human health are understudied and poorly understood. Cultural impacts are not adequately addressed in the ongoing assessments and not included in any ongoing conversations in a way that is meaningful. These natural resources are critical to cultural practices that have existed since time immemorial and are trying to hang on to today. Only the IJC can enforce demonstration of stabilization and reversal of water quality contaminant trends in the Elk, Kootenai, and Kootenai portions of the watershed. BC, Montana, and Tech have failed for many, many years. There's a clear need for international, federal, state, and tribal participation all along the US-Canadian border. Thank you.
Many thanks, Chairwoman Fayant. I'm now honored to introduce Chairman Gary Aitken Jr. of the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho.
An issue for us ever since they decided to draw the line across our living room, so to speak, you know, right through our villages, and told us we can't cross that line without permission. This is a boundary that we've, you know, been forced to recognize, that we don't recognize inherently. So we have a Kootenai Nation, multiple bands, used to be 7, now 6, the way it said, bands in Canada, Montana, Idaho. And among those bands, there's also many family units that lived along this river. You see how the river goes from Canada to Montana to Idaho, back into British Columbia again. Many different family units had different areas along the river where they would camp and we trade, had vast trade networks with our neighboring bands. And it was essentially our super highway. That's how we got along everywhere, to get to different hunting areas, to different gathering areas. So we were put here in this land by the Creator, and we were told that as long as we take care of this land will be here to take care of us. So that's the covenant we hold dear to our people, to take care of this land, so in turn we are taken care of. So it's a
Chairman Aitken, you froze. I'm not sure if others are having that experience. Can I get a thumbs up from the panelists? Chairman, maybe let's see if you come back to us. Oh, okay, we lost him. Hopefully he'll be able to call back in. With that said, I will we'll circle back to Chairman Aiken if he can join us again momentarily, but I'm going to invite Chairwoman Denise now to give her remarks. And I just want to say, remember to use the question and answer box for your questions. Keep in mind that there will be a survey going out after the webinar where you can ask additional questions and provide feedback. All right, Chairwoman Denise. I'm sorry, I apologize. Chairwoman Denise of the Kootenai Nation in British Columbia.
Okay, there you go. Okay, will you put my slide up just so I can, for context? So what you're going to see on the screen is a picture of the homeland of Amakas Dinacha. First of all, I should start off by saying Gisu Gyukiet Kapiniskiet Husukis Nausan Mietki. So good day to each and every one of you, and I'm really happy to join you in this discussion around an issue, obviously, that is of great concern to all of us. So this is the map that you see is Amakas Dinacha, the homeland of the Kootenai Nation in and around southeastern British Columbia, and obviously includes parts of Idaho and Montana. The Kootenai Nation Council, who I represent, includes 4 communities in British Columbia, and then we also have relatives in the Kootenai tribe of Idaho, as well as the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And I'm the chair of the, oops, there's Gary. I'm the chair of the Kootenai Nation Council, which is made up of the 4 communities in British Columbia and about 1,500 citizens. So I've heard I've heard from others some of the concerns that are of issue to many folks, and I think very clearly that the Kootenai River system forms a very core part of our Amakas Dinacha, our homeland. The Elk River is a major tributary of the Kootenai River system, and it lies within the Kootenai traditional territory of Gok and Amakis, which is the land of the raven. And we welcome the interest of the IJC and others in protecting water quality and other values in the Kootenai River system. And I just want to share with you very quickly the vision statement of the Kootenai Nation that says, as a nation, we are striving to achieve strong, healthy citizens and communities speaking our languages and celebrating who we are and our history and our ancestral homelands, working together, managing our lands and resources within a self-sufficient, self-governing nation. So that vision, it provides us with the guidance of how we do things. So we remain unwavering in our role given us by the Creator as stewards of this territory. Water is of profound sacred and cultural importance to us, and we see huge future challenges in the Elk Valley related to water quality, carbon emissions, climate change, and economic opportunity. We are starting to work to develop a long-term vision for the Elk Valley, both separately within the nation and also collaboratively with the government of British Columbia. So we also have concerns regarding transboundary water quality. Our nation is profoundly interested in and committed to protecting the waters of the Elk and Kootenai rivers. The river systems and the life they support are a key source of sustenance for our communities and citizens. We are the river, and the river is us. We are deeply concerned about the increasing selenium contamination in the water and the fish of the Kootenai Reservoir and the Kootenai River well downstream of the Libby Dam. We've worked very hard with the governments of British Columbia and Canada and with Teck Resources over the last 10 years to seek solutions to the growing water quality problem in the Elk and Kootenai River systems, caused principally by the filling of valleys and mountainsides with waste rock from 5 open pit coal mines. It continues to be very challenging to find effective long-term solutions. So we are working with British Columbia and Montana and others to seek agreement with Kootenai consent on a Kootenai selenium water quality objective by late 2020. We are concerned that the waste rock spoils continue to grow and are projected to continue to grow before comprehensive solutions, before the water quality challenges that are in place. So in terms of the Boundary Water Treaty and the International Joint Commission, the IJC, we've engaged for the past 20 years with the IJC, first with respect to their Grand Coulee Order and the loss of salmon, and then with respect to the future of the Columbia River Treaty. More recently, we have requested IJC involvement in the Kootenai Transboundary issue. We are very interested in understanding and exploring how the IJC might be able to help resolve the very serious problem of contamination of the Kootenai Reservoir and the Kootenai River downstream to Kootenai Lake. So we are encouraged by renewed Canadian interest in IJC, as demonstrated by the recent appointment of the 3 commissioners that we heard about earlier in the webinar, and so we have previously requested IJC involvement in Kootenai and Kootenai water quality issues. So we will be raising that question again to initiate at least some exploratory discussions. And one of the concerns that we have is whether or not the government of British Columbia will support IJC involvement. So we're very much aware and very alive to the concerns that are being raised by our downstream relatives and our downstream neighbors, and we're doing our part as much as we can to ensure that we're able to bring about some answers that will deal with all of the concerns that are raised. So we do have the opportunity for ongoing dialogue, both with the government of British Columbia through various formal agreements that we have that are government-to-government arrangements, as well as an agreement that we have with Teck Resources that allows us to provide input and feedback to the activity that they are carrying out within the boundaries of our homeland. So I look forward to hearing the rest of the discussion, and as the moderator indicated at the outset of this conversation, that the time that we have available today is not likely to get us to anywhere other than further identifying the issues, but I think to have all of us together in one place is a good opportunity to, to highlight the level of concern that continues to impact all of us, and it's now that we've been introduced to each other, and hopefully that we will be able out of this to develop some processes that is going to help us move forward and deal with some of the issues that we've raised throughout this conversation. So I want to say thank you to the organizers for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from the remainder of the panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Denise. I could not agree more with your final sentiment there. Absolutely. I'm really excited we're all together today. Pleased to have Chairman Aiken Jr. back with us. Chairman, I am happy to kick it back to you if you would like to continue with your remarks.
Sure. Thank you. My apologies, everyone. I'm on my phone, and it overheated and it shut me out completely till I cooled it down. So I appreciate you bearing with me on that. I spoke of the Creator and the covenant, which we hold dear, and because of that covenant, we've noticed there's a lot of things that are happening with our region and our area and natural resources. After first contact was made, many things have changed since then. So in order to address these issues that have happened, the Kootenai River white sturgeon has been put on the endangered species list. We've been working to restore their populations in our river system. We've worked to restore the burbot, who's functionally extirpated. We avoided putting them on the list. It made things a little easier to work with them. They're functionally extirpated. So we've got them back up to a sport fishery as well as a tribal subsistence fishery. And we're doing a tremendous amount of work within just the habitat around. We're doing, we spent millions of dollars restoring, trying to get back to nature as best we can, realizing that we have the parameters of modern society. We like electricity, we like to not flood, things like that. We have some constraints, but they're acceptable constraints at this point. So we're trying to bring it back to nature as much as possible. And we've spent a vast amount of resources doing so. And to realize that these type of minds and actions, between transboundaries are affecting not only our animals and natural resources, but eventually our people as well. It's detrimental that we do something about it. And so in trying to do something about it, we've worked with EPA, we've worked with the IJC, and that's kind of the path that it led us down. And I'm glad that we were able to find this forum to be able to work together, because what's happening now is inadequate. The transparency is lacking on the techniques and what they need and what's actually the data of the level of pollution. The transparency is lacking, and also just the levels of enforcement are lacking as well, especially in the most affected areas, Montana and BC. We're right down in between them both. On both sides of the river, it flows to us and back in. We're downstream. The sturgeon are a very affected species, being so long-lived. So we're doing all we can to be able to do our part to restore our habitat and our ecosystem back to as close to natural as can be. But these are some of the things that are affecting us, and we're going to need the federal, help on both sides of the border, as well as the inclusion of tribal nations and state, of course, to be involved in this, to work a worthwhile group, a worthwhile effort to be able to address these issues. And it's very important, and I applaud the previous speakers for their care and their well-spoken words and thoughts. This is something we're looking forward to and building together, and to being able to truly address these issues in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Again, it's just, I'm over the moon right now with hearing from all of you. Thank you so much for your remarks. Going to bring you all back up to the north. Can you see my screen? Is it the right one? Great. Okay. So back up to the Alaska, British Columbia transboundary region. So Northwest British Columbia, Southeast Alaska. The watersheds that Salmon Beyond Borders focuses on are from north to south, as you can see on the map, the Taku, the Stikine, and the Unit River systems. These watersheds are roughly 30,000 square miles. And I didn't have time to do the metric version of that, but roughly these watersheds make up the size of the country of France. On the British Columbia side of the border, there are roughly 2,000 people, and in Southeast Alaska, there are about 75,000 people. As you can see, a very diverse, broad range of First Nations in Northwest British Columbia. And for many who don't live here, this may seem like the middle of nowhere. But for those of us who do live here, this region is the center of everything. So the Taku, the Stikine, and the Unit produce 80% of Southeast Alaska's king salmon. These rivers are the largest salmon producing rivers in Southeast Alaska and contribute to our annual $1 billion commercial salmon fishery as well as visitor industry. And as I'm sure you will hear from President Peterson, these rivers are the lifeblood of Southeast Alaska. So Salmon Beyond Borders is focusing on more than a dozen of British Columbia's large-scale mining projects that are in various stages from abandonment to operation in these watersheds, some of which rival the size of the proposed Bristol Bay, or the proposed Pebble Mine in Bristol Bay. And we calculate that 19% of the total drainage area of these three rivers are staked with BC mineral mining claims or leases as depicted on this map. It's kind of hard to tell, but The black areas in there are the current mineral claims. So this includes 59% of the Untitled River watershed, along with the entire Iskut River corridor, which is the largest tributary of the Stikine River and pictured here in this map. As Aaron and others have mentioned earlier, there are quite a few problems with the current mechanisms in place for permitting projects within these transboundary watersheds. We maintain that permitting allows for mines to be developed in the BC headwaters of transboundary rivers absent the following: consent of Indigenous communities in both British Columbia and the United States, an analysis of historical impacts from such mines, the independent collection of 3 to 5 years of baseline conditions, an independent and comprehensive evaluation of downstream impacts, a demonstration of technology to mitigate impacts that satisfies both the US, Canada, and Indigenous governments that shared resources won't be harmed, the establishment of an independent and fully funded perpetual monitoring system, and the establishment of a robust financial assurances regime, otherwise referred to as financial assurances, that covers all mining impacts, as well as the establishment of an arbitration process for settling such claims. British Columbia lacks any clearly articulated or legally enforceable timelines under which a mine operator must post financial security, and there are no mandatory penalties for failing to post adequate financial securities in a timely manner. Under these rules, it is possible that a mine nearing the end of its productive life, when reclamation costs are at their highest, could be completely unsecured. As you'll see in this picture, this is Mount Polley's, the failed Mount Polley mine tailings dam that took place in August of 2014. So in the northwest part of British Columbia, the mining industry has claimed that region as the Golden Triangle. And most of the proposed projects in the Golden Triangle will require open pit mining and tailing storage. And as one indicator of their potential scale, as I mentioned earlier, these are massive, massive projects. The Red Chris mine, which has operated since 2015 and also owned by Imperial Metals, which is the owner of the failed Mount Polley mine, maintains a tailings reservoir dam that is permitted to stand at 344 feet tall, or 105 meters high, and contain approximately 107 billion cubic feet, or 305 million cubic meters of tailings. The heights of the failed dams at Mount Polley and the Brumadinho mine in Brazil were 131 feet, or 40 meters, and 282 feet, or 86 meters, respectively. So we are talking massive, massive projects. Salmon Beyond Borders has organized for many years in Southeast Alaska and into British Columbia, as well as partners. We've developed partnerships, collaborations, as this webinar indicates, but in Washington, Idaho, and Montana as well. But Salmon Beyond Borders in particular has organized around enforcement of the Boundary Waters Treaty, as we've heard plenty about. We seek a dialogue or a forum that could be a result of International Joint Commission involvement that can lead to binding international protections that are consistent with the Boundary Waters Treaty and governed by our federal and Indigenous governments. And specifically, within the treaty itself, Article 4 incorporates an underlying principle that the treaty is not only intended to resolve water disputes like those occurring in the Elk and Kootenai systems, which we've heard about, but that it is also set to prevent transboundary harm as a precautionary measure and a precautionary principle, and that the responsible party, and in this case it's British Columbia's mining industry, should compensate for the transboundary harm it causes to its downstream neighbors. And we commonly refer to this as the polluter pays principle. Again, these are the basics of this issue and the work that Salmon Beyond Borders and our partners have done over the years. There's plenty more to it, believe me. But with that, I am honored to introduce my dear friend and colleague and our distinguished panelist, President Richard Peterson of the Central Council Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you to Salmon Beyond Borders for hosting this. It is an honor to be on this panel with these very esteemed panelists. My name is Chakya Ish. My English name is Richard Peterson. I'm Kagwantana, the Eagle's Nest House in Sitka. I grew up in the village of Kisan on Prince of Wales Island. It's one of only 2 Haida villages in Alaska. I serve as the president of Central Council Tlingit Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska. We are the largest federally recognized tribe in Alaska, where we have 229 federally recognized tribes. We cover the area from Saxman to Yakutat, pretty much the Southeast Panhandle. We also have large delegations in Seattle, San Francisco, and Anchorage, with just over 32,000 tribal citizens worldwide. This is of paramount concern for us, the whole issue of transboundary mines. As some of my peers mentioned, as Indigenous people of these lands, we're tied to these lands and these water bodies, these rivers. We belong to these rivers as much as they belong to us. And so we've been really concerned. I've been president of Tlingit Haida for 6 years. And ironically, 6 years ago today, we held meetings here in Juneau with representatives of the Tahltan Nation to discuss just this topic. We had a renowned author, Wade Davis, there with us and had some discussions. And for us, it kind of laid that groundwork of, while we've been working on these issues with the state and federal government, and we do have the support of our congressional delegation, it's very difficult for us, as these headwaters are on the Canadian side of a border, a line that was drawn, this invisible line that so successfully has divided and separated our Indigenous people. But trying to work with the Canadian government, really they have no compulsory reason to work with Tlingit Haida or any Alaska tribes. So for us, we realized in that meeting with the Tahltan Nation, it was going to be bringing us back together, reuniting those ties, and working with our brothers and sisters across the border, that we feel we're going to get any headway on this issue. Again, as Jill pointed out, many of the river systems here in Southeast Alaska, while the headwaters may be in Canada, we're on the receiving end. And, as we learned with Mount Poly, a system could be devastated. And our concern is well, in Mount Poly, Imperial Metals, the company that did Mount Poly, is in one of our watersheds, and they have the same plans as the Mount Poly tailings dam. So our concern is we could have the same thing happen and completely devastate our fisheries. And these river systems, these watersheds, supply, the predominant amount of our salmon needs. We go up these rivers to hunt moose. We utilize these rivers to go and gather medicine, to get cedar bark, to do live our traditional way of life. And so if we saw what happened with Mount Poly happen here, it would be completely devastating to us. And while we're concerned about new development, there's old development that still, the Taku River sees poison to this day. So to that end, Tlingit Haida has been working very closely with our government. Our previous state administration, the Walker administration, we worked extremely close with. I do want to just take a moment and recognize former Lieutenant Governor Byron Malott, who passed away last week. Byron was a true ally. He was a Tlingit, and he worked diligently to make the state government work closely, not just with the tribes, but other entities that were working on these issues. In fact, we had joint trips to Canada with the Walker administration with Lieutenant Governor Malott. And I think really we were able to have forums and discussions with state regulators, and now it's kind of radio silence. So we're trying to push to get those kind of relationships with this administration, and we're hopeful we can. But it was really a great time for us to have that relationship with the state and that administration. I want to recognize two of my vice presidents, Rob Sanderson Jr. and Will Micklin, who have worked tirelessly on this issue. I also want to commend my Native Lands and Resources staff, Desiree Duncan and Ray Paddock. They've been overseeing implementing a baseline water quality monitoring system in several of our southeast rivers, the Alsac River, which is near Yakutat, the Chilkat and Klahini rivers near Klukwan and Haines, the Taku River here near Juneau, the Stikine River near Wrangell, and we'll be partnering soon with the United States Coast Guard and the Ketchikan Indian community to begin testing of the Unit River. And one of the things I want to say is none of this would be possible if we didn't have relationships with our local tribes in those communities. And so we think that we want to be a part of the solution. We want to be careful stewards of the land. So doing the baseline water quality monitoring, I think, is imperative. We've received funding from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to do this. And I'm really proud of the work that they're doing. It's science, very based in science. We're doing good work that's going to prove good results, I think, and they'll be defensible. And so I really believe that defensible data and on the impacts of mining is going to be imperative to have. So when we do travel to these communities, like I said, we always invite the local tribe to participate with us. We want to build that capacity so that every tribe can do this work themselves. It's important to note that we've traveled up and down these rivers for subsistence and trading purposes since time immemorial. But, we talk about that almost in the past tense. To this day, right now, currently, we rely on these systems every day, as I said earlier. So we have a vested interest in the protection of these waters. We have a sacred obligation to protect these waters. And it's something that we carry forward every day in the work that we do and our beliefs. To put a monetary figure on that is almost impossible for us because it really is representative of our traditional way of life, a way of life that we have enjoyed since time immemorial, that we enjoy today, and that we want our future generations to enjoy. So we want to make sure that while we're not against industry, we want to make sure that industry protects our resources, and the industry should do responsible work. And so far, unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of that responsible work. We hope it can be done, but we've seen some of the damage done. Mount Polly kind of sends shivers down my spine. It's, we've all seen what happened. It's in August, it'll be 6 years since it happened. And in the 6 years, industry pretty much got away with destroying an ecosystem of a treasured watershed, completely extinguishing the salmon runs that have been there for thousands of years. So that's just unconscionable to me, and something that Tlingit and Haida and our Southeast Alaska tribes, I think, all stand united that we're not going to just stand silent on that. We're going to be active participants in making sure that our voices are heard, that we're actively involved, and we're going to do it on every level, from local, state, and federal government. Again, doing that baseline water quality monitoring, I think, is going to be a thing that really is recognized as us stepping up and being engaged and involved in responsible management. And we continue these ongoing discussions with our congressional delegation. As I said, they support us and we keep pushing, but I think really where we're going to make a difference is when our Indigenous governments band together across the border. That invisible line should be ignored. We should cross back and forth freely as our ancestors have for over 10,000 years. And so that's what we're going to continue to push and advocate for, is building those relationships. Again, I want to say Gunukchish, Hawa, Jill, Salmon Beyond Borders, for inviting me here, and it's been a great honor. Thank you.
How about Richard? Thank you very much. Our final panelist today is another dear colleague. Let me introduce Mr. Alan Itzerza from BC's First Nations Energy and Mining Council.
Thank you, Joel. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel. It's an honor. As Jill said, my name is Alan Itzerza. My Tahltan name is Mala. I am a member of the Wolf Clan for the Tahltan Nation. I currently am sitting as a member of the Tahltan Elders Council, and today I've been asked to come and speak at this panel as someone on behalf of the First Nations Energy and Mining Council here in British Columbia. I want to start by speaking as a Tahltan elder. I want to say that we, Tahltan, we say we have unsurrendered title and rights. If you take that in lawyer language and simplify it, you say we have ownership of lands and resources, and we have jurisdiction and authority as a level of government. So when I see organizations like the IJC, I think it's critically important for those organizations that come into our territories to work out an agreement or a protocol with us as to what they're going to do and how they're going to do this work in our territory. As we look at the future and we talk about international agreements, I think it's also critically important for the US and Canadian government to recognize we are governments and we have a right to sit into those discussions that impact our lands and our resources. I want to just give you a quick summary of the who the First Nation Energy and Mining Council is. It's an organization that was established by the BC First Nation Leadership Council. That council is made up of leadership from the First Nation Summit, the Union of British Columbia, UBCIC, Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the BC AFN, our organization that fits into the federal organization. The First Nation Energy and Mining Council is an advocacy group. We do not say that we represent individual First Nations, nor do we say that this organization deals with title and rights. That is left with the First Nations. This organization reports up to the First Nation Leadership Council, but is accountable to the 203 chiefs in assembly. Our people in British Columbia recognize that mining is an important resource sector as we strive to achieve self-determination. As the lead for the First Nation Energy and Mining Council, on mining reform in British Columbia, we have engaged with the province of British Columbia. These discussions initiated and were galvanized, I guess, in earnest because of the Mount Polley tailings breach. That was a monumental environmental disaster. As you all know, it was shortly after that there was the big Bale mine in Brazil that also breached the tailings, and there was significant loss of life in that event. I think it's fair to say that the mining sector has lost public confidence in British Columbia. And I think that it's largely due to things like the impact to the environment. For example, we see these abandoned mines like the Telsaqua Chief on Telsaqua River, Taku River system, like the carbon footprint of the mining sector itself and its impact on climate change. We also watch our raw materials being shipped from British Columbia to places like China that used technology like coal-fired smelters and refineries that are continuing to impact our climate. As was stated earlier, the province says they have a polluter pay policy for mining in British Columbia. But recently, the Chief Inspector of Mines issued a report saying that there is less than 50% of the resources being held in security to do the mine restorations as per the mine restoration plans. We're also seeing at this time end users like Apple, like Microsoft, and financial institutions like the banks starting to demand that their supply chain start tracing their product to ensure that certain level of mining standards are being met. And this will only increase in the near future. The First Nation Energy and Mining Council undertook some technical work to assist our First Nation leadership as we engaged with the province of British Columbia to develop the new legislation for environmental assessments. The interesting thing about this Environmental Assessment Act is for the first time in legislation, we now have the opportunity for First Nations to take the lead and conduct those environmental assessments. The First Nation Energy and Mining Council also undertook technical work to support the First Nation Leadership Council as they engaged with the provincial government to develop the recently proclaimed Declaration Act that is intended to be used to implement United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. With that in mind, our leadership are beginning the process of engaging with the provincial government to talk about how do you take resource legislation and make it consistent with the Declaration Act. So to try to address some of the concerns, the First Nation Energy and Mining Council jointly worked with the Eco-Fiscal Canada, and we developed and released 3 financial assurance reports. Basically, these reports are seeking government to embed in legislation or regulation something that is enforceable to ensure that we have hard financial assurance for any mines to operate in the province of British Columbia. And what we mean by hard commitment, we're saying cash, bonds, insurance, that type of commitment. We're seeking the public government to also establish a major fund that could be utilized when we have emergencies such as the Mount Polly disaster. And we think if this fund is significant enough that we may have the ability to also start to look at how do you deal with those abandoned mines, such as the Telsequatchie. We are also making recommendations in these reports to the First Nations throughout British Columbia to consider the idea of implementing such a standard for their territories if the public governments are not going to move to do so. As part of the work that I do with the First Nations Energy and Mining Council, the mining company Imperial Metals that owned Mount Polly applied to do some drilling at the headwaters of the Skagit River. We all know that the Skagit River has salmon population. We know that it's a water source for many of the communities in Washington. And so when we engaged with this group, the group of tribes in Washington, we also spoke with the Coast Salish who are on the BC side of the border. And there's no uncertainty that these tribes and First Nations are very concerned with the idea that a company would be allowed to do exploration in that type of area. We also have been tracking the selenium concerns with respect to the Columbia, and we're aware of all of the mining activity in and along the BC-Washington border. When we went into Washington, met with the tribes, what we did is we jointly worked on a declaration. We are very concerned with the Pacific wild salmon stocks, and we're very concerned with the pollution in our waterways. These discussions with the province to reform mining obviously have to look at their Mineral Tenure Act, their Mines Act, and try to make them consistent with the Declaration Act that was recently proclaimed. And to look at how do you help First Nations build capacity to take a more significant role with respect to monitor compliance, et cetera, of these various initiatives. We've started working on an idea of a Guardian Network initiative in the province of British Columbia. As our people would say, we're looking to put boots on the ground. It's the kind of group that could develop baseline data, as was discussed earlier, to provide technical assistance to the leadership when we start to engage in shared decision, shared management of the lands and resources of our territories. And we are currently working with the University of Victoria to develop a Guardian Network initiative report that we intend to publish. And that should be out in the next couple of months. With that, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers once again and to invite me to participate in this. All my relations, Nadu.
Thank you so much, Alan. And thank you again to our distinguished panelists for, again, sharing your time and knowledge and the endless efforts to you or to each other and for your communities. Again, I'm so thankful that this event could take place during such uncertain times. And our hope, again, is that this is just the beginning. There's a lot of work, as we've all shared with one another. There's a lot of work that is to be done to defend the rivers and the communities that connect all of us. I'd like this opportunity. We have a few minutes left. You guys, we did it. If there are questions, I'm going to unmute all of you. Questions for each other. Again, Bree, thank you so much. Bree has been tracking the Q&A as they come in. But I'd love for all of us to to be able to ask each other questions. And again, I'm trying to unmute you. All right. There we go.
I don't have any questions, but I just would like to show my appreciation, gratitude, and thanks to all of those who participated. And I look forward to working together. And if you have any questions of me, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Aiken. Go ahead, Marilyn.
I just wanted to thank all of you for taking the time to share your stories with us, many of which we're aware of some of the detail and are aware of your frustration. And I in particular feel the concerns that you have. I've worked with Indigenous nations for a long time, and I know that the struggle is to find the tool that can help you achieve the protection of your way of life and your rights. And I just really want to express my interest, I think, on behalf of all the commissioners, that we're interested in a dialogue with you and to continue. I know we haven't had a lot of time here, but if there's follow-up, we're certainly interested in talking to you. We have an obligation to do so, and we're interested. And also just to our biggest constraint, and we didn't create this, but it's the world we live in, is there's only certain things IJC can do. And so with that in mind, I just share in particular my interest in trying to find if there's some way that we can do something positive and useful together.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other closing remarks? Go ahead, President Peterson.
Thank you. I just want to make a statement. You know, it's really great to have our Indigenous leaders here, but us coming together is one part. We really need our allies, and I think this is such a strong platform for that. And I want to thank you, our allies, for being here with us and hearing us and actively working with us to solve these problems. I will say I've had great disappointment in what the IJC is, but I think if we all come together and help empower you folks, we can make the IJC really a useful tool. You know, it has the potential to be what we want it to be, but it really has fallen short, I think, over, you know, its existence. But Meryl Ann and Rob, I just thank you so much for carrying that forward and participating, working with us and hearing us. I think we can be successful if we keep growing this platform. And today, you know, Salmon Beyond Borders hosted this that had nearly 200 people. And hopefully this is the first of many, and each time it just grows and grows. And pretty soon, for me as a leader, it doesn't feel like I'm kind of speaking into the wall, that it's actually going out and being heard and kind of taking life. And so I'm grateful for what this is today.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, also express my thanks to all of the panelists, but I also wanted to say that there is a lot of work going on. You know, I don't want to leave the impression that, you know, that all we're doing is sitting here wringing our hands. You know, we are doing some very serious work, and we have mechanisms in place by way of the agreements that we have both with the government of British Columbia and with industry that, you know, that give us a very strong voice to move things forward. So we're not, you know, we're not sort of just expressing concerns and don't have solutions. We express concerns, and we are very much part of trying to devise what the solutions are going to be. And so I just wanted to, you know, to say that we're very committed to moving forward to, you know, to deal with the issues that have been identified in our part of the world around, you know, around selenium, etc. But just to let you know that the Kootenai Nation is working very diligently through, you know, through our staff, and I want to express my appreciation to the staff that assisted me in putting together, you know, what was a very really cursory picture of all of the activity that we're involved with. You know, we wouldn't have had enough time to talk about everything and all of to the level of detail that we need, given that you know, we had a limited amount of time. But I do want to say that this was a good opportunity for us to raise those and to recognize that the fact that the international boundary, regardless of whether it's north or south, you know, it is a concern for Indigenous people, and it's something that I believe by working together that we can take that on and move it forward and deal with some of the items that we've identified as concerns. So thank you again for your work and bringing us all together, and look forward to future opportunities to have an ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Many thanks, Chairwoman Denise. Other remarks?
Jill, I'll just jump in on one further thing. It goes without saying that your strength is as governments negotiating with other governments. That the governments are the ones who own this treaty and who implement it. And so coming together as nations, having a common purpose on even some things on this. I know not nations don't on everything, but on key things that you care about, to the extent that you have allies among yourselves to present common positions and to negotiate with government, that the domestic governments are who control this and own this treaty. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that this is a really great forum, because I understand you haven't necessarily all talked to each other before, or don't necessarily on an ongoing basis. And so these kind of, I call them internal reconciliation processes, where you really start to speak as nations to each other, and are just wonderful. And to the extent that I'm just honored to be part of the conversation.
I would also like to thank the organizers of this, Jill and Brianna, and also to all the panelists for the information that you provided. I've been kind of watching this whole issue from, I would say, the sidelines, and but it's always been something that I stayed with to try to keep learning more and more because of the water, the sacred water issue at hand. And Aaron Sexton's been a really integral part of that, as is Stu Levitt and Rich Jansen of our staff as well. So thank you, Aaron, and thank you everyone today for all your perspectives. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fayant. Other comments, remarks from the panel? Again, I just can't say enough how thankful we are, and for the panelists and for those who called in to listen and hear and witness this this dialogue. Some of you may recognize also that the state of Washington is not represented amongst this panel, but please stay tuned for upcoming transboundary dialogue that will surely focus on the salmon coast from Alaska all the way on down. We are very, very thankful, again, for everyone's time, and this is the first of many, and may it be the first of many. And again, you'll receive a survey following this webinar. The panelists and I will all do our due diligence to follow up accordingly. Please make sure to visit salmonbeyondborders.org for more information, where Bree has been posting and will be posting more information. And huge thanks to Bree for providing the technical support today so that this could happen as it did. Thank you so much, everyone. I am honored to be here with all of you and look forward to working together in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.